Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the RoMobile weekly webinar. Today's webinar is going to focus on two new features that we introduced with Roads 2.2 this week, Bluetooth support and calendar support. So if we take a look at our Roads device capabilities page, you can see under the calendar events, which is in the same section as the PIM phone book contacts area, you have the API for Road Event, which is very similar to the existing API used for contacts. The differences here is that it allows you to find based on start and date and various types of searches. And the fields that are returned are listed here. For Bluetooth, there is a separate page called Bluetooth API. There's a few limitations of the current implementation that we're working on resolving. They're listed here at the beginning. There's an example of the Bluetooth API. There's two classes for that, which is the Bluetooth Manager, which establishes a session with two devices, and the Bluetooth Session, which allows you to send and receive data between those devices. And there's also a short example of how to use the Bluetooth API, as well as an example in the system API samples of a Bluetooth chat program. So the application we're going to write today is going to be a calendar application that then allows you to sync your calendar contacts. So we'll go to our Roha page and create a new project. We'll call this one Blue Cow. And then we'll go ahead and create. Once that's done, we will copy our Git URL. Go to our terminal here. And we will clone our Blue Cow project. Once we've done that, we'll go ahead and go to our application. We're going to run set roads SDK to update our builds YAML to point to our local repository. And we're going to generate a model that we're going to use to do with all of our controller logic. Since we're going to be using the calendar API and the Bluetooth, this isn't going to be a traditional model where you're accessing a ROM database. We're just going to be doing all of our interactions through the calendar and events API. So we're going to say RoGen model, we'll call it cal, and we'll give it one property called name. We'll then open this up with our text editor. Thus now we have our roads application. So the first thing we need to do in order to use the Bluetooth and calendar is we must add those capabilities to our road build YAML. our row config to our build.yaml file. So at the bottom, we're going to add capabilities, Bluetooth, and calendar, and save that. The second change that we're going to make is that we want our index page to go directly to our model that we created, so when you open the application it just goes to our calendar. So we've done that. Previously I've created a couple of JavaScript and CSS files that will allow us to display calendar. I got an example of a calendar online and modified it to work with roads. So I'm going to go to the command line and copy over some of those files. We'll go back to our application. And we see there's been a few files added to our JavaScript. So this application, I'm going to make it an iPhone-specific application. So we're going to customize our application to look very specific on iPhone. I'm going to do that by modifying our layout file and setting different styles here. So we're going to remove all of the platform-specific view code. We're going to change the initial scale to make it fit on the screen better. We're going to add some of our JavaScript resources that we did previously. And we're also going to add a bit of CSS styling for our calendar as well. So now our layout contains a couple JavaScript files and CSS styling for our calendar, which is going to be laid out as a table. Finally, we're getting to the meat of our application. We're going to start working in the model here. So our model file, it doesn't have sync enabled, and we're not going to enable sync because we're not using the sync server. We're going to do all of our work in our controller, and primarily our index page. So we'll set our index page up here. Our month is 10, and then we'll generate a calendar, and we'll create that function here very shortly. Let's take a look at our index page. In our index ERB, since we're going to be doing this completely custom, we're just going to remove all of this generated code. and add in our calendar code. So you see our calendar is in the controller is going to have the months, so we need to create this constant of months so we can give it the proper month title for our calendar. We have our table here, and our header is going to have the months of the week as well as our footer, or sorry, the days of the week as well as our footer. And finally, since we're going to be doing Bluetooth support, we're having a button that allows us to receive a meeting request. So I'll save that, and we'll go back to our controller. As I mentioned before, we need our months constant. So we'll set up our months, and then it'll give us names for the 12 days of the month. We're going to set our generate calendar function. So this I wrote yesterday, and it is how we're going to generate our calendar. So walk through this code here. The first thing we do is figure out what the first day of the month is, what the last day of the month is, today's date, and then we also make a copy of the day to start with our days. So what we do then is, using our events API, we find all events that have a day starting within the month. So we do a row event find, we say all for all events. The start day is the first day of the month, the end day is the last day of the month. The type is starting. So with a starting, there's different options that you can do here on the find type. If we take a look at our wiki page here, it's documented on what the different types mean. So starting means we're looking for events that are starting between the 2 days that we listed. If we did ending, we can search for events that are ending between those 2 days, or occurring where it has either the start or end within that value range. So right now we're looking for only events that start within that month. Then we start generating our calendar. The first week it may have some blank spaces at the beginning of the week. So we calculate that based on the first day of the month, which weekday it is. We generate that many columns with a call span that has a padding here. And then for the rest of the days, we generate our days. And so we have two methods here. Class for day, because if there is a meeting on the day, or if that day is today, we want to change the color of the square. And the text for the day, which includes the meetings that exist on that day. And then we close that row. So that's the first week in the calendar. So then we continue to generate the rest of the calendar, which is a little bit less specialized. We save what week it is, and then we iterate through the rest of the days of the month. So while the day, which is the current day that it is displaying, is less than the last day, and the month is the same month, it's going to generate the days. If it is a new week, we create a new row for the new week, and then we output the cells here for each day in the week. And finally, at the end, because it will not end on the exact ending day of the row, we calculate how many days left are are left in the last row and generate the padding for that final row. So the two methods we're missing here is class for day and text for day. So first we'll add text for day. And then we will add the class for day. Our text for day method calls a method event on day and passes it the day, so we need that method as well. And it also gets all the events for a certain day. So there's two methods that we need. So we will put in both of these methods. So event on day, it checks based on the day that's passed in, creates a date object from the start date, year, month, and day, because the start date is actually a time object, so you can't compare them directly because it can start at 5 p.m., 1 p.m. We only care about a day, so we create a date and then compare if any event is on the day that is passed in. That allows us to know that if we need to do more work for that day or we just need to generate the day number. Events for day is very similar, except instead of exiting on the first day it found, it adds all events for that day to an array and returns that array. So that allows us to generate the text for that day in the annotations here. So if we go back to our text for day function, we check if there is an event on this day. If there is an event for this day, we add a div that has events, and then for each event we do a list item that has a title, a description, and a button to send that meeting. And that send meeting goes to our action send day that we will create using the Bluetooth API to connect to the other device. And finally it closes that events tag, and then it will return the events. If there is no event on that day, it just returns the day number to put into the calendar. Class for day checks that if there is an event on the date, it will set it as date has event. Otherwise, if the day is today, it'll give it the today class, which will change it to another color. So that's how we generate our calendar. It will then have the listings for all of our events and display on our calendar. So I'm going to save that, and we'll run this on our iPhone simulator. However, the iPhone simulator does not have a calendar, so the events and getting the events for the day will not work. Well, I can run this by saying rake run iPhone. And this is going to do our iPhone build. We can see there's an uninitialized constant date. What we forgot to do is, since we're using the date functions, we need to actually require those methods here in the beginning. And actually, since we're using events and we're going to be using Bluetooth, we need to require those as well. So let me add my require statements here. We require row events to use the events and calendars. We require Bluetooth to use Bluetooth, and date to access the date functions. So we have fixed our methods here. Run our application again. And you can see we now have a calendar that has been generated. And there is no meetings here because the iPhone simulator does not support the calendar API. But we can see our calendar is rendering properly. Our days are being numbered properly. We have our highlighted date, which is today, the 15th. So far our application is doing pretty good. So we'll go ahead and exit that and continue working on adding the Bluetooth capabilities. So the two methods that we are using, that we have in our calendar, as you can see, we have the action send day, which allows somebody to send a day, and in our index ERB, we're doing the action receive day, which allows somebody to receive something. So we need to implement those two methods in order to get our calendar to work. The first thing we're going to do, however, is set up some class variables to track that information. We're going to see if it is connected to the device, if the ID to send it, and the sender that we have, whether or not this device is going to be the sender. Our first method is going to be send method, the send day. This is going to set the sender to be true, and the ID to send is going to be the parameters here. If the Bluetooth is available, we set our device's name to BlueCal Sender. We then create the session using the server role. So a Bluetooth can be a client or a server. And so the way this application is using is you can set it up to be server or client. If you're sending, you'll be at the server, and if you're receiving, you'll be the client. So one thing you notice here is we need a callback function, a connection callback. We also need our receive day function. So we'll put our receive function in here first, and it's going to be the same as our send day. However, we're going to say sender equals false. So these are the same, except that we now have our device as BlueCal, and our role is going to be the client. So it's important that you must have a server and client when connecting. You can't have two servers talking to each other and two clients when talk to each other. We also need an ERB for send day. So we will create a new file. I'll call this sendday.erb. And we'll just say please wait. So both of these methods here require this connection callback. The connection callback is when two devices are associated and connected, you'll get a callback saying connected or not connected, or if there was an error or if the user canceled the connection. So we're going to do our connection callback, checking the status. If the status is okay, then we're going to continue connecting to the device. We save the device that we have connected it with and output that to the log file for debugging. We then set a callback for the session, and if you recall from the documentation, the session is where we read and write our data, and is how we do connections. So when a read comes in, the read triggers the session callback, which lets us know there's data, and we can read and process the data there. So then we check if we're the sender. We're going to find the ID to send, which is saved here. And then we're going to iterate through all of our events that we have looked at and find that ID. And so if the ID matches, we're going to dump that object using Marshall and URL encode it so we don't have any funky characters that get passed in that might cause issues. Finally, we're going to call the Bluetooth session write string. We're going to send it to the device we're connected to and the string. After all that's done, we're going to navigate away from our waiting page back to our calendar page. And on the receiver side, all that happens is that the connection is made. Since it is not the sender, it does not try to send this information, it simply navigates back to the index here. So I mentioned our session callback, which is what we require to read and write data. So we need to implement that method as well.